Another story we want to mention that we've discussed this before in past podcast lives. This has been a topic of discussion for a while now, which is the Preakness potentially moving to accommodate the Preakness. Basically, because, the Belmont does just fine being 5 weeks after the Kentucky Derby. Preakness has suffered more and more in recent years, being in that middle jewel position 2 weeks after the Derby, 3 weeks before the Preakness. A lot of times, Mage was the only horse this year that ran in both the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness. We saw Rich Strike pass on the Preakness as the Derby winner. I think that was the real seismic shift in terms of the way people looked at the Triple Crown spacing. So First Racing has announced that they're giving strong consideration to moving the date of the Preakness so it's run 4 weeks after the Kentucky Derby. Now, the problem is Belmont and NYRA do not seem on board with this. So we might get to a point where there is no more Triple Crown because it's like physically impossible for the horses to run in all 3 races. This is going to be a little bit of a game of chicken, I think, in the next couple of years. I just want to read a quote from Aidan Butler, who is the CEO of First Racing. He said, "We've discussed it internally and believe it's in the best interest of horses and horse safety to move the race 4 weeks after the Kentucky Derby. This would give horses more time to recover between races to be able to run in the Preakness. Horse safety is more important than tradition. NYRA is aware and considering how this would impact the Belmont. Stay tuned." I mean, John, that is such bullshit, my man. Like, that is like,
don't play that.
Can we have the siren go off for that? Because it's like, not to say that Aidan Butler and First Racing don't care about horse safety, but that is not the impetus for this move. You want a better field and a more stacked race for the Preakness. But John, we haven't spoken about this in a while. Maybe your opinions have changed. I felt like we were both kind of traditionalists on this thing. Where are you at now with switching the Triple Crown's spacing?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Previously, I was all in favor of keeping things as is because there is so much gravitas and so much importance on the Triple Crown and the fact that there hadn't been one for so many years, for decades. And now we've gotten a couple, not in a row, but, a couple over the past couple of years. So we've been a little spoiled. But at the end of the day, breeders like to have horses that have as many Grade 1 wins as possible. Especially on the dirt. And, the Derby, is in itself its own island. It's a standalone. The Preakness we talked about a couple of shows ago, and all the stallion prospects that came out of the Preakness. So obviously, it is a race that people respect. But for the recent times, the Preakness has been the redheaded stepchild of the Triple Crown. People just not only don't care, they, like you said, they've been skipping it. And I think when COVID hit and the entire Triple Crown calendar got turned upside down, I think that's when people started to see, maybe we should, move this thing around a little bit, because if we can get a better, group of horses running here, it only benefits us, for overall. And Joe, I remember we talked about this a couple of years ago where you and I brought up the idea at the time of the Preakness maybe being downgraded. And not being a Grade 1 race because it just wasn't getting the Grade 1 caliber horses for the most part that were coming in. And our third host at the time scoffed at that. But if you look at it, if you took the name of Preakness off of that and you said, here are the horses that are competing in it, it is not a legitimate Grade 1 compared to, the Derby, the Belmont, the Jim Dandy, the Breeders' Cup races. It just doesn't compare to those. And to me, as a purist, Grade 1s have to be that great. They have to be that difficult of a race to win. Otherwise, they lose their value. So I think that it's a necessary move. As much as I don't want to see it happen, as a purist, I think it's going to happen because there's really nothing keeping them together. There's no agreement that Churchill and First and NYRA have to stay together in that order, in that sequence of events. And really, it's kind of turning into an every man for himself at this point. So I don't blame, First for doing this and Stronach Group for doing this, but I really don't want it to happen. I think it's inevitable. I think
I agree. And I think that they're kind of trying to put the early pressure on NYRA. Because like NYRA's defense has been all along, like, we're traditionalists, we don't want to mess with the Triple Crown. But if the Preakness moves to 4 weeks after the Derby and you stay where you are, you're messing with the Triple Crown. Like, obviously the first racing made the move, but if you care that much about the Triple Crown and they do that, then you got to move too, because there's absolutely no way anybody's going to run in all three races. And I think it's also unfortunate. I've made this point before. I think it's also a little bit unfortunately kowtowing to trainers who do not want to run their horses more than 4, 5, maybe God, heaven forbid, 6 times a year. Like that to me is kind of rewarding, is rewarding that, I'm not going to say cowardice, but like lack of competitive fire, if you don't want to run your horses more than 4 times a year. But the question for me, I think, and then we'll see, because like you said, I think this is happening. If we do 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks, is the public still going to care and be able to have their attention as transfixed as it is by the Triple Crown? Because that's one of the nice things about the Triple Crown. It's 3 races, 5 weeks. I think asking the public to follow horse racing for an 8-week period, I think, we'll see. Well, I'll just be interested when this does happen, because it is going to happen, what the TV ratings are going to be like. But yeah.
Right. And Joe, just a question for you. I'm curious about your opinion. So let's say that this all gets turned upside down, and that the Triple Crown gets elongated as far as on the calendar goes. And there's going to be ramifications as far as what other races get bumped because of that, or get moved, or eliminated altogether. If they're going to make the calendar change, if NYRA makes the calendar change and decides that they, are going to keep it 4 weeks after the Preakness, do they change the distance? Because nobody in the breeding industry wants to have a 1.5 miles. They're not breeding for 1.5 miles. They don't want to have stallion prospects that run 1.5 miles. Do they cut it back at that point? Since they're making a change, they might as well pull the whole Band-Aid off.
I think that's going to be the next topic, is like the horses are too fragile to run 1.5 miles, and it's such an antiquated distance, which the latter part is definitely true. But it's supposed to be different. Like, this is my whole problem, and I don't want to come off as like a stodgy traditionalist, but the Triple Crown is supposed to be different from the rest of the racing calendar and the rest of the distances that we normally run. It's supposed to be an extraordinary test. If it was just like everything else, it wouldn't be as special, and there are plenty of other races out there that the public would never, ever in a million years care about. This is sold and marketed to the public as the test of the champion. That's the Belmont specifically, but this is the test of the champion. These 3 races together, that's the only reason that have only been 13 horses to do it in history, because it's supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be unique. But this is the way of the world now, John.